Okay, I think we're going to get started. So thank you all for attending and welcome to this presentation on public service loan forgiveness, the program and the temporary waiver that has been in place since last October. The purpose obviously is to help everybody understand how you can benefit from the latest relief being offered by the Department of Education for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. My name is Nancy Meerman. I am the Assistant Director of the Education Debt Consumer Assistance Program. We are a program initiative of Community Service Society, a large nonprofit. Our program is dedicated to providing free and unbiased counseling and advice on all things student loan, all things related to student loans. I'm here with my colleague and the director of the program, Carolina Rodriguez. Just a few housekeeping items before we start. So during the presentation, it's going to be about a 30-minute presentation, and then we will open it up at the end for general questions. But during the course of the presentation, feel free to type in any questions that you may have about PSLF or any other topics related to student loans in the Q&A function. There is a chat function as well, but we would prefer that you put your questions in the Q&A, and Carolina is going to be behind the scenes answering those questions, and we'll periodically open it up as well so that everybody gets to hear the benefit of some common questions and answers. So with no further ado, I'm going to stop my video and then share my screen, and we will start the presentation. So Carolina, if you could just confirm that you can see the screen.
We can see it. Thank you.
Great. So an estimated 9 million public service employees throughout the country and over 500,000 in New York may be eligible for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And just as a brief recap, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program forgives balances, student loan balances for those with federal student loans that have been working for in public service jobs after making payments of 10 years. Late last year, the Biden administration introduced a temporary overhaul of this program that waives key requirements of the program to allow more people to benefit from the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And we want to make sure that everybody understands this temporary opportunity because it does have a deadline, and the deadline is coming up at the end of October. We want to make sure that everybody understands what you have to do or what actions you may need to take in order to make sure you're benefiting from this program. So in terms of the agenda, we're going to talk about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, the original program, and the temporary waiver opportunity so that everybody has some context for what we're discussing. Then we're going to talk about any action steps that you may need to take in order to benefit from the waiver. And then we'll go into some frequently asked questions and resources at the very end. So about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program and the temporary waiver. The original program was created in 2007, October of 2007 to be specific, and that was meant to incentivize individuals who are working for public service to continue working in public service. The program forgives federal student loan balances for borrowers that work full-time for an eligible employer, and an eligible or qualifying employer is typically considered to be a nonprofit or a government organization, federal, state, local, or tribal. Also AmeriCorps and Peace Corps. Periods count towards public service loan forgiveness after making 120 qualifying monthly payments. So that's basically paying into the program for 10 years, after which your loan balances become forgiven. The 120 payments are cumulative, not consecutive. What that means is that you don't have to work consecutively in a public service job for 10 years to get this credit. So if you are working for 3 years and you get 3 years worth of credit in public service, and then you leave to go to the private sector for a couple of years and you come back, you don't lose that first 3 years of qualifying payment credits that you accumulated. And then one of the best features about the PSLF program is that the forgiven balances are not taxable. And that's unlike most forgiven consumer debt in the United States. which is considered to be income on the part of the government and generates a 1099 and you don't pay taxes on it. That's not the case with public service loan forgiveness, forgiven balances. Once the balances are forgiven, that's it. You have nothing more to worry about. So to put some context on this and why the temporary overhaul was implemented last October, PSLF was started in 2007, and the first applications for people who thought that they might have qualified for forgiveness came in late 2017 or early 2018, so about 10 years after the program was begun. The rejection rate at the beginning was 98 to 99%, and it stayed that way really up until the waiver was introduced last October. And some of the reasons for the rejection rates being so high was that the program has been poorly administered. So there's been a lack of clarity as to what constituted a required qualifying payment. People didn't understand the rules. They just assumed that they had to just have worked in the public arena in public service for 10 years and they would be eligible, and that is just not the case. And then there was no way to track your progress until maybe 5 years ago, something along those lines. So at the very beginning of the program, people just assumed that they were racking up credit, but there was no means of confirming that. In reality, the requirements for the program are actually strict, and there are many. And like I said at the beginning, they were not well advertised. People didn't know what they had to do to accumulate qualifying payment and what the requirements were. And there were a couple of things that really tripped people up. So number one, under the rules of the original program, only direct loans, this is the kind of loan program you're in, only direct loans qualified. There are other older loan programs like FFEL or Perkins. Many people had those loans, and they didn't realize that those loan programs did not qualify for PSLF. You also had to be enrolled in what's called an income-driven repayment plan. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but when I say income-driven or IDR, that's an umbrella term for 4 different plans that we'll discuss a little later in the presentation. But there are 2 basic ways of making payments for student loans. You can either pay the traditional route, where you're making payments based on the size of the loan, interest rates, and a payback period. That's like paying back any other kind of consumer loan, and those are called standard plans. Or you can pay back in an IDR plan. Under the original program rules, you had to be enrolled in an IDR plan, and many people were not, and therefore they did not qualify. So along comes the waiver in October of 2021. And the purpose of the waiver was really to address some of these issues that have been preventing people from accumulating qualifying payment credit towards the program. It's known as the PSLF Temporary Waiver Opportunity. It was introduced in October of 2021, and it's got a deadline. There are certain actions that you may need to take by October 31st of this year in order to benefit from the rules, from the waiver rules. And what the waiver rules really do is they relax certain requirements of the program, like the kind of loan that you have to have, or the repayment plan, and some other requirements surrounding the way you make payments, to make it easier for people to accumulate credit towards the 120 qualifying payments they need, or to actually get forgiveness. So what it actually, at the end of the day, means is that people who were in, regardless of what kind of repayment plan you've been paying your loans in, or if you have non-direct loans, even though you may have to take some action to consolidate them to create a direct loan, you're still going to get credit during the waiver period for those loans that you would have otherwise not gotten credit for before. So it's really important that people understand what they may have to do between now and October 31st to make sure you're evaluated under these looser rules. Just one thing that people should understand, that during the COVID forbearance, and for a lot of people, and most of you here probably understand that on March 13th, 2020, most federal student loans were automatically placed in what's called the COVID forbearance. It was an emergency forbearance that the government implemented that allowed the loans to be where payments are suspended and interest rates have been set to 0. Suspended payments in the COVID forbearance, if you have the employment requirements, will count towards public service loan forgiveness. So under normal circumstances, when you're in a forbearance, that wouldn't count, but the suspended payments under that particular forbearance, which started March 13th of 2020 and ends potentially ends at the end of this month, will count towards PSLF. So let's just go over some of the requirements under the original program and compare them to the temporary waiver and to understand where the differences may be. So in terms of borrower eligibility, under the original PSLF program, both student and parent borrowers are eligible for PSLF. Now with parent borrowers, it's a little bit more complicated, and we're not going to go into all the details of that, but direct Parent Plus loans do not qualify unless they're consolidated into direct consolidation loans under the original program. Under the temporary waiver, student borrowers can benefit even if they consolidate their loans. Under the original program, once you consolidate a loan, any accumulated credit towards PSLF is lost upon consolidation. Under the temporary waiver opportunity, student borrowers can consolidate their loans and still get credit for the pre-consolidation loans after the consolidation is done. Unfortunately, that same credit is not extended to Parent Plus borrowers, so they are not eligible for that aspect of the waiver. Qualifying payment count start date under the original program and under the temporary waiver, that is October 1st, 2007. That just means that no payments prior to that date are going to count towards the 120 that you need for public service loan forgiveness. Loan type, under the original program, direct loans only qualified. If you had non-direct loans like FFEL or Perkins loans, you could consolidate them under the original program. They would at that point become eligible for PSLF, but the payment count towards PSLF would start only upon consolidation. Under the temporary waiver opportunity, all these federal loans, whether they're direct or non-direct, are going to qualify. But you do have to consolidate the non-direct loans in order to make them eligible for the waiver. So you would consolidate an FFEL loan and a Perkins loan. Unlike the original program, during the waiver period, if you consolidate, they will look back at your pre-consolidated loans and give you qualifying payment credit. The repayment plans. Under the original program, you had to be in an income-driven repayment plan. Some payments in the 10-year fixed version of the standard plan might count as would count as well, but you could not remain in that plan for the entire 10 years, or you would have been paid the entire loan off. So you would at some point have had to transition to an income-driven repayment plan and stayed in that plan for most of the life of the loan. Under the temporary waiver, they're going to consider payments under any repayment plan as long as you meet the employment requirements. So employment requirements. The employment requirements under the original program and under the temporary waiver have not changed. So you must be working full-time for a qualifying employer. And as I said, a qualifying employer would be a nonprofit, a governmental organization. So if you're working for the federal government, state government, local governments, tribal governments, and this can include schools, universities, AmeriCorps and Peace Corps, all of that is going to be considered an eligible employer. And by the way, it doesn't matter what your job is, as long as you have a full-time job for one of those types of organizations, it will qualify. So you don't necessarily have to be a social worker or a nurse or a lawyer working in a legal aid organization. You could be administrative staff, you could be custodial staff. It doesn't matter if you have student loans and you're a full-time employee, you're going to qualify. Payments under the original program must be made on time and in full. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Under the waiver period, they're not really actually looking at whether or not you paid, they're looking at your repayment status history. So were you in repayment? Were you in a status that required that you make a payment, or were you in a deferment or a forbearance? The number of payments required is still 120 under the original program or the temporary waiver. So you have to make 120 qualifying monthly payments. That's basically 10 years worth of payments. So before we go on to the next area, Caroline, are there any questions that you want to share with everyone?
So there's one question that I think comes up a lot, and you might dive deeper into it, and that's for people who graduated when the COVID forbearance was in place. And the question is, what, if anything, am I benefiting from the waiver? And so in general, if you recently graduated and you have newer loans, like all your direct loans, you should still go ahead and submit the Pslf form, which Nancy is going to talk about later on in the presentation, just to start tracking your payments. However, if you went to undergrad and then worked for a qualifying employer and had some repayment periods there, you would potentially benefit from the waiver. So I think that's important for you to be aware that you might want to submit the forms and make sure that if there are any retroactive payments that you would benefit from, that is accounted for. So I'll stop there because I know you're going to be covering more about this issue down the presentation.
Okay, great. Thanks, Carolina. So let's talk about the action steps that you may have to take in order to benefit from this. First of all, the deadline is Halloween. So if you can't even remember the exact date, just remember that the deadline is Halloween, October 31st, 2022. There's two basic things that you have to make sure you have covered by that date. Number one, if you have any non-direct loans like the Pslf or Perkins loans that we've talked about, those have to be consolidated. So a consolidation application must be submitted by October 31st in order to benefit. Secondly, if you haven't done it already, you're going to have to complete what's called a Pslf certification and application form. These forms verify that you've met the employment requirements of the Pslf program, and you need to submit one for every employer that you've had from October 1st, 2007 until the present, or for whatever time period during that time frame you want reviewed for qualifying payments. So those forms must be submitted by October 31st. And remember, this is just submitting the forms. Particularly with the Pslf certification and application form, the actual count doesn't have to be completed by that date. The forms just must be submitted, and the consolidation application must be submitted by that date. So let's talk a little bit more about the programs, the direct loan, the loan programs that we've been mentioning. If you were to go to apply for a federal student loan right now, the only loan program that would be available to you is the William D. Ford Federal Direct Loan Program. So generally with the direct loans, if your loan has the word direct in it, you do not need to consolidate these loans for the purpose of the waiver. Now, the one exception there is if you have direct Parent Plus loans, those are not going to qualify on their own. But for anything else that says direct, the word direct in it, though, it's not required that you consolidate for the purposes of the waiver. And the different kinds of direct loans that you may see are direct subsidized loans, direct unsubsidized loans, direct plus loans for graduates and professionals, or direct consolidation loans. Now, for the direct plus loans for parents, they don't qualify for the waiver. They can be consolidated anyway for the purposes of receiving PSLF credit, but you will not get the benefit of the look back on the pre-consolidated loan. So you won't get any credit for periods where you may have otherwise met the qualifications while the loans were direct Parent Plus loans. Now, just a little caveat here, because Parent Plus loans can be a little tricky. You want to reach out for help before consolidating a Parent Plus loan, particularly if you're considering consolidating it with a non-Parent Plus loan. In general, you don't want to do that. So if you have any questions about that, reach out to us and we'll be able to help you. The kinds of loans that do need to be consolidated are these older loan programs, one of which is called FFEL. The FFEL loans were made way back in the day, up until 2010. And these were loans where the lender was a financial institution, but the federal government actually guaranteed the loans. So they are considered federal loans, but not all FFEL loans are actually coming directly from the government. The other kind of loan that needs to be consolidated is what's called the federal Perkins loans, and those were generally dispersed by your schools, and again, guaranteed by the government. So how do you know what kind of loan you have? Well, you can either call your servicer. or the federal student aid, and ask whether or not you have direct loans or what kind of loans you have, or you can try to what we call DIY it, just log into your accounts and figure it out yourself. So if you're choosing to log into your accounts, you want to start with logging into your federal student aid account at studentaid.gov. Just to be clear, studentaid.gov is the Department of Education's website for anybody that's got federal student loans. So in addition to your loan servicer site, which may be a Fed loan or a Great Lakes or an Advantage, anybody that's got a federal student loan has a federal student aid or student account at studentaid.gov. For those of you with newer loans, that would have been where you filed your FAFSA. For those of you with older loans, you may have to establish an account. But the website is studentaid.gov. So you would log in there after creating or with your FSID or after creating an FSID. You're going to go to the My Aid. You're going to click on the My Aid tab underneath your name, which is the menu. And then you're going to scroll down to loan types. And here you can see 3 different categories or a number of different categories of loans. You see consolidation loans, Perkins loans, subsidized loans, unsubsidized loans. Now, with 3 of the 4, with consolidation loans, subsidized loans, and unsubsidized loans, you can have both. Those loans may be direct consolidation loans, or they may be FELP consolidation loans. They could be direct subsidized loans or FELP subsidized loans. You don't know unless you take the next step. And the next step would be next to any category that has a balance, you're going to click on that down arrow, and then you're going to see the full name of the loan. So you can see in this case, this individual, it was indicated she had consolidation loans. When you click down, you can see that she actually had direct consolidation loans. So she would not be required to consolidate again for the purposes of the waiver. Now, once you've determined what kinds of loans you have, if you think that you have to consolidate, where do you go to do that? Now, generally, you can consolidate loans online, again, on your studentaid.gov account. It's typically the easiest way to do it if you can do it this way. What you're going to need is your FSA ID to log in. You can click the link here that's on this presentation, which you will have post the presentation. And then you would click Start to go through the process. You can also access it just by going to the FSA website, navigating yourself to consolidate a loan, and then logging in. Just a few tips. You're going to just answer all the questions as you go through the process. You want to select Do Not Delay Processing. You want this done as quickly as possible. You're going to select Mohila as the loan servicer. Only one loan servicer is in charge of the Pslf program, and that is now a company called Mohila. So regardless of where your loans currently are, you're going to select Mohila as your servicer. The next part of the application is it's going to ask you to enroll in one of the income-driven repayment plans. Now, this can be a little bit confusing, this part of the process. There is an estimator there. And what we would say to you is just pick the payment plan from the estimator that makes the most sense to you, that looks to be the cheapest. A word about the payment plans. If for some reason it turns out to be not the right kind of plan for you, or there's something better there that's out there for you, these plans can be easily changed after the consolidation process is over. So don't think that if you wind up picking a plan and it's not the best plan for you, that you're stuck in it. It can be changed. So just pick the thing that makes the most sense for you and get through the consolidation application. So let's just to recap. You want to make sure that you have direct loans. So you're going to determine what your loan type is by going through the steps that we just discussed. If you have non-direct loans like the FFEL loans or the Perkins loans, you want to consolidate them. You have to consolidate them before October 31st to make sure that they're eligible under the waiver, and we would urge you to consolidate them as soon as possible. You can do this all on studentaid.gov. If you get confused, you can contact us and we will help you through the process. So I'm going to now talk about the second page of the process once you've done the consolidation. The next part of the process and the next thing that has to be submitted by October 31st is called a Pslf certification and application form. It's a 2-page form that verifies that you've met the employment requirements for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. It's used to update your qualifying payment count. It's also used to actually get forgiveness if you think you have all 120 qualifying payments. Now, what we're seeing here is a manual version of the form. And what would happen is that you would be responsible for filling in everything on page 1, and then you would sign and date the bottom of page 1. Under section 2, unless you think you have all 120 qualifying payments, you're just checking off that you want to find out how many qualifying payments you've made towards the 120 that you need. So that's page 1, and that would be the borrower, that would be you that would have to fill in all of that information. Page 2 is what gets submitted to your employer. They would fill it in, and then they would complete section 4 and sign and date the bottom. And then once that's done, you've got a completed form. Now, if you need to consolidate the forms, you can submit if you need to consolidate your loans, you can file the consolidation application online first, and then you can submit the forms right after. You don't have to wait for the consolidation to be completed. It can take 4 to 6 weeks for the consolidation to actually complete. Once you've actually submitted the application, you can submit the forms to Mohila. We would suggest that you submit them with a note saying that you consolidated your loans and the date on which you consolidated, and just make sure that all the forms are submitted by October 31st, 2022. So where can you get the form? We've provided a link here to the PDF, but there's another way to file this form, and it's called a Pslf. It's called the Pslf Help Tool, which can be accessed through your federal student aid account. And what the Pslf Help Tool does was it's going to ask you all the questions that you've seen on the forms, and you're going to answer the questions, and the answers to those questions will then auto-populate all of the information that you see here on the form. Now, the forms, it's important to understand that these forms, when you use the Help Tool, don't go anywhere. The tool is used to generate the form. You still have to print it out, have it signed by your employer, and then submit it to Mohila. But there are 2 basic reasons that you might want to use the tool, or you should use the tool whenever possible. Number 1, because it auto-populates a lot of the answers, it prevents a lot of errors on the part of employers that tend to take place when they're filling out these forms manually. Number 2, we know that the servicer is giving priority to reviewing forms that are generated by the Pslf Help Tool, as opposed to those that are being handwritten and generated manually. So there's 2 things that you're going to need to generate the form through the Help Tool. You're going to need your Federal Student Aid ID, because you must do it through your FSA account. And then for each employer that you've had, you're going to need their employer identification number, which is something you can get off of your W-2s, or you can ask your HR department. And you're going to need your exact employment dates. So your hire and end dates if it's a previous employer. And that means a full date. So you're going to need to know month, date, and year. If you just put down month and year, it's not going to work. If you have that information, you can use the Help Tool. If for some reason you don't have the information, then you can just file the form manually, print it out, submit it to your employer, and do it manually. If for some reason you have a previous employer that you cannot, that for some reason is either refusing to sign the form, or maybe they don't exist any longer because they've gone out of business, on the bottom of page 1, I know it's a little bit difficult to see here, right above where you would sign as borrower, there's a box to check off. You can check that box off if you cannot obtain a signature from a previous employer. And then what you would do is you would fill in everything in section 3. This is where the employer would normally fill it in, but you would fill it in to the best of your ability and leave section 4 blank, and you would send the form in that way. And then presumably, the Department of Education is going to help you determine whether or not you have credit for that particular employer. So do you need one form for each qualifying employer? Yes. In order to get credit for any qualifying month, or for any month, you must have a form that covers, that verifies that you met the employment requirements for that month. So you're going to have to submit a separate form for each employer that you've had since October 1st, 2007. And remember, employment prior to 2007 and months prior to 2007 do not count. Again, you can verify your employer qualifies by using the Pslf employer search tool. This link here, it does not require that you log into your account. If you want to just see whether your employer is eligible, you would log in here, but you will still need the employer identification number to do that. A couple of other tips when getting these forms signed by your employer. Make sure that you and your employer only provide wet signatures or hand-drawn signatures. Now, you can submit a scanned version of a hand-drawn signature or a wet signature. What they will not accept, though, is an electronic signature or any kind of scripted font. In terms of who can sign off on the forms, it has to be an authorized individual within your organization who's authorized to verify employment. That typically is somebody from HR. You also want to make sure that on page 2, let me just go back to this, that the employer in section 4, that they fill out everything in section 4. So if they just sign and date it, that's not going to be enough. They have to put their name, phone number, title, email in, and you want to make sure that it's legible, because if it's not legible, it may get kicked back. And then we talked about the fact that if the organization is closed, you can check off that box right above the borrower signature. Where do you submit the forms? So right now you need to submit the forms to Mohila. Mohila is the new Pslf servicer. They have taken over from FedLoan servicing. FedLoan was the Pslf servicer since the inception of the program, but they announced in the last year that they are going to be exiting the federal student loan servicing business, and they are right now in the process of doing that. So for anybody basically everybody has to submit these forms to Mohila at this point. If you have an account at Mohila, we recommend that you upload them from your online account. If your loans are not at Mohila, you're going to have to mail and fax them, and the information is right here. There's also a phone number that you can call if you need help filling out the forms. We do strongly recommend that you actually fax and mail the forms, and that you keep some kind of a receipt. So if you're mailing it, go to the post office, do it certified mail, get a certified mail receipt. If you're faxing it, make sure that you have the fax receipt so that you have proof of the date that you submitted the forms. And also look out for any kind of acknowledgement letter from Mohila that they have received the forms. If your loans are at FedLoan still, and many of you may still have loans at FedLoan, you can upload these forms to FedLoan, and you should do so, but you also should mail and fax them to Mohila. We're just recommending that everybody cover the bases at this point, because ultimately these forms need to get to Mohila. So what happens after you submit the form? If your loans are with Mohila, the forms are going to be processed, and then you're going to get some kind of notification letter. And this is all coming from FedLoan, because as yet, Mohila just started doing this, and to the best of our knowledge, they actually haven't sent out any of these letters yet, but something like this should be done, where they're sending out, I apologize for all the sirens in the background, where they're sending out letters to you telling you exactly how many qualifying payments you have, and it's going to be done on a loan-by-loan basis. Excuse me for 1 minute, I'm just going to close my window. Sorry about that. It's going to be done on a loan-by-loan basis. It's going to tell you how many qualifying payments you have, how many payments are remaining, and what the estimated date of loan forgiveness might be. And these are just estimates. So you're going to get a letter like this. If your loans are not with Mohila and you weren't consolidating, filing those forms, it's going to trigger the loans being transferred to Mohila. So they're going to get transferred there first, and then they're going to start doing the review of your loans, and then you'll get some kind of a notification. Now, once your loans are at Mohila, you're going to be able to track your progress online using an online payment tracker. This is an example of what was on what FedLoan used, and we have now seen that Mohila has just implemented this on their website, and it looks very much like this. The same kind of thing. you're going to get notice of how many qualifying payments you have. So just to be clear, what you want are qualifying payments. Qualifying payments are payments that are in the bag. Those are payments that are going to count towards the 120. When you see eligible payments, basically eligible payments, they have assessed that you've met all the requirements of the program, you have the right kind of loan, you have the right kind of repayment plan. They're just waiting for you to file the next PSLF certification and application form. Once you file those forms, those eligible payments become qualifying. And ultimately what you want to do is get to 120, after which point your loans will be forgiven. So how do you know your loans have been forgiven? So you're eventually going to get a letter from the servicer that's going to tell you that you have a $0 loan balance. And then after that, and there's usually a little bit of a delay, you can look on your federal student aid account, and you may also get an email from them, and you'll see that your loan balance is $0 with this little celebratory birthday cake, but some kind of celebratory icon that they put on there, and you'll know that your loan balances have been forgiven. I will say that once you've submitted all the forms, or you've done the consolidation, you've submitted the forms, be patient. They're behind schedule. It's taking them a long time to do this. You just need to make sure that you submit those PSLF certification forms by October 31st. You don't have to have the final count by then. They'll be counting well after that deadline. So just to recap, you want to generate the form using the PSLF help tool if possible. If not, by just sending, using the online PDF and sending it manually. Have your employers sign the forms and then submit the forms to Mohila. You want to make sure that you keep mailing and faxing receipts of everything that you do, and keep a receipt of the actual form itself. And then it's a waiting game. It's going to take a while for everything to be processed. Once you get the final determination, you're going to review that. If it looks right for you, great. If it doesn't, you want to dispute any issues that you have right away. And just remember that not everybody is going to have all 120 qualifying payments immediately. So this process should be pursued whether or not you think you've got 120 qualifying payments or not. If you think if you've only been working for 3 or 4 years and you know you need 10, you still want to go through this process and get your and make sure that you are on track and get that accumulated credit, particularly as it may be more easily awarded to you during this waiver period. If things go wrong, there are still other avenues to pursue. You can submit complaints either through the New York State Department of Financial Services. We have a close working relationship with them. You can also submit complaints to the Department of Education's Ombudsman's Group on their online feedback center that is also through your federal student aid website. And then there's something called the PSLF reconsideration process, which has been implemented. That was implemented after the waiver. You can click here to log in and file your complaint there. And we urge that you do that if you really feel that they have not calculated your payment incorrectly. But I will say that it's a recent feature that they implemented. We have submitted some complaints there. We have yet kind of to hear back from them, but presumably at some point they'll be addressing complaints through the reconsideration portal. And you can also contact us for one-on-one help because we know that this can be a confusing process, and we can certainly answer some of your questions. So I'm just going to really quickly run through these FAQs, and then we'll open it up for any additional questions. So are Parent Plus loans eligible for PSLF? Unconsolidated Parent Plus loans do not qualify for PSLF, but you can consolidate them, and once they become a direct consolidation loan, they will be eligible for PSLF, but they are not eligible for the temporary waiver, so no credit would be awarded to the unconsolidated Parent Plus loans after the consolidation. Basically, the payment count would start from the date of the consolidation. But you do, as I said earlier, want to make sure that you consult somebody before you consolidate a Parent Plus loan. It's a little tricky, and you want to make sure that you're just not getting into any kind of problematic scenario by consolidating your loans. What happens if you don't have the 120 qualifying payments? Well, with PSLF, you're not actually enrolling in a program, you're accumulating payments towards the 120 that you need to get your loans forgiven. So if you don't have all 120 qualifying payments prior to the or after the waiver is completed, don't worry, any payments that you've acquired during the waiver period are going to count after the waiver period. So just remember that it's important to file the forms and get that count, file the forms that will allow your loans to be reviewed under these temporary waiver rules. Because if you start consolidating loans after the waiver period is over, you're not going to get credit for any of your pre-consolidated loans. Once the waiver is over, you're going to have to start making payments under the original PSLF rules in order to accumulate additional qualifying payments if you don't have all 120. So you would have to continue to make payments in an income-driven repayment plan while working for a qualifying payer, a qualifying employer full-time, and making your payments on time and in full. So all the rules of the original PSLF plan will apply once the waiver is over. I graduated during the COVID payment pause, but have been working for a qualifying employer. Should I submit the PSLF form despite never making a payment? Yes. So suspended payments in the COVID forbearance, which started on March 13th, 2020, and is supposed to last until the end of this month, unless it's extended. Suspended periods during that time period will count if you have the employment requirement. So even though you may never have made a payment before, it's worth filing the forms just to get your payment count updated. And like I said, it's gonna give you an official count, and you'll be with Mohila, and you'll be all set up to accumulate additional payments going forward. Must the 120 separate monthly payments be consecutive? No, as I said earlier, you don't have to work consecutively. It can be cumulative. You will not lose credit for any qualifying payments you get. You can pick them up and apply them later on if you come back to the public service sector. Should I consolidate all my loans? So this is this can be a tricky question. If you have non-direct loans like FEL loans and Perkins loans, you have to consolidate those in order to make them eligible for PSLF. If you have a mix of direct loans and non-direct loans, you can consolidate them all together. Or you can consolidate just the FEL and Perkins loans. And whether or not it makes sense for you to do that, you might want to reach out for help. The one thing that we would say is be very careful about consolidating Parent Plus loans with any non-Parent Plus loans. Definitely reach out for help before you do something like that. If you already have a payment count for direct loans and you consolidate them, your payment counts may temporarily be reset to 0. That's the way they're doing it, and it's confusing a lot of people, but don't be alarmed if that happens. They're going to then just start reapplying all the qualifying payments that you might have had prior to the loans being consolidated. I will say this, if you had a prior qualifying payment count, which means that your loans are already at Fed loan, you want to make sure that you download any important details like your loan details, payment history, and that qualifying payment count history from your Fed loan website before your loans get transferred to Mohila. If Mohila is managing the PSLF program, can I transfer my loans to them? So you can't just generally call up a loan servicer and say, I want to transfer my loans. That's typically not how it works, but there are 2 ways that you can actually transfer your loans to Mohila. If you are consolidating it during the consolidation process online, it allows you to select a servicer. So at that point, you would select Mohila, the loans would be transferred. If you're not consolidating, once you file those PSLF certification and application forms to Mohila, that's going to trigger your loans being transferred over to them. And then if you need help, you can contact us. Here are our here's our contact information, our phone number, and our email. We offer free and unbiased student loan counseling services, and we're helping people every day now with these consolidation applications and the employment certification form. So I think I'm going to just stop there and open it up, Carolina, first to you, and then we maybe just open it up for people to ask other questions.
Yeah, I think the only question that came up really to highlight was around the Parent Plus, and you've already, emphasized that. If you have Parent Plus loans, reach out to us. And we're not intentionally omitting information from this presentation about Parent Plus, but it's such a different monster that we really need to have a conversation with you and figure out everything with you to determine what's the best course of action. So given that we only have a few more minutes, please feel free to raise your virtual hand, and I'm happy to unmute you so you can ask any additional questions you may have. Don't be shy. Any questions? Again, feel free to raise your virtual hand. Okay, I definitely don't want to hold you. So you'll get a copy of the recording, and we'll usually post it on our website, the same website you probably went to register. I've included in the chat a link to the PowerPoint presentation, the slides that Nancy just covered. And I also included our contact information there. Just so you know, we are being a bit overwhelmed with the number of requests for one-on-one. So it will take us like a couple of days to assign a counselor, and then it may take the counselor 1 to 2 more days to reach out to you. But if more than, let's say, 5 business days have gone by and you have not heard from us, feel free to give us a nudge. We want to make sure that we get you in the queue to give you the help and assistance you may need. And other than that, we would really appreciate if you can spread the word about our webinars. This is the best way for us to make sure that everyone who may potentially qualify for this additional temporary relief takes advantage of it. And I see that we have a question. So
we have a question. So
okay. So go ahead, Tim.
Hi. So in interest of spreading the word, can you place that link to sign up for the next info session in the chat, please?
Yes, I will do that. Give me 1 second and I will do that. Thank you so much.
we can also, and I think it actually may be on the follow-up email that we send to you. So
yeah, we'll also include in the follow-up email, but feel free, like I put it in there. And if people go to edcabny.org, on the first page there, it's kind of like our banner promoting the webinars, but I put it in there. Please don't hesitate. Like, I am sure you have colleagues, friends, who are teachers, work in nonprofit or government. Just forward it, say, hey, you may be interested in this. Again, it's time limited, so we want to spread the word to as many people as possible. As Nancy mentioned, there are over 500,000 people who may be eligible for PSLF, and we want to get everyone in the door. It's worth it, to say the least.
I think we have another question. Go ahead.
I have a question. I just graduated and I work for a nonprofit. Do you believe that I will qualify for that?
So if you just graduated, if you just graduated and your loans are out of the in-school deferment, so periods where your loans may have been in an in-school deferment, even if you were working full-time for a qualifying employer, those are not going to count. But if you just graduated and you're out of the in-school deferment and you're working full-time for a qualifying employer, from whatever point you came out of the in-school deferment, those probably would qualify. When you say just graduated, like how recently?
December.
Okay,
in December.
Okay, so
of 2021.
Right. So typically, if you after you graduate, your loans go into what's called a grace period. That's usually a 6-month period where you're not required to make a payment. Periods spent in the grace period do not qualify either. So you would have had to be out of your in-school deferment and out of your grace period in order for you to qualify. But you can, there's no harm in checking, you know, or filing the form, because the worst thing that can happen is they tell you no, right? You could just file the form and see what they give you. It's not gonna hurt you.
And just to
Okay.
confirm, PSLF is not an all or nothing. So it doesn't mean that if you don't file, let's say, the employment certification
Yeah.
because you just graduated by October, you have to accumulate the 120 qualifying payments. So once October comes by and it's gone, you can continue working towards PSLF. The waiver really is for people who might have older loans, or they have repayment periods that they were not making under an income-driven repayment plan. This is your one chance to get all those payments counted under the waiver. But again, if you have direct loans and you're just starting, you're just gonna follow and meet the criteria for PSLF and continue working towards the PSLF program and accumulating payments. So is it only for after graduated or when you stop attending school? So when you stop attending school, it's the same thing. If you fall below part-time status, then your loans should have a grace period and then enter into repayment. So the short answer is yes, it also includes when you stop attending school. Ted, you had another question?
Yeah, so going off of the previous question, how can I check if I just graduated in 2021 too, how can I check if I was in that grace period, or I'm going back to school again, but I'm not taking out loans for that. So how could I, make sure that it's not like I forget what the language is.
Deferment?
Yes.
Yeah. So you can actually check on your studenta.gov account. It's a little bit tricky, so reach out to us and we're happy to guide you through that process. And then the other thing that I want you to keep in mind, and we've seen it a lot recently, is people may have undergrad loans and then go to grad school, and they may or may not take out more loans. So just so you know, if you go back to school and you put your loans in deferment, even if you're working full-time for a qualifying employer, you're not going to accumulate credit towards PSLF. So you want to make sure in your case specifically, if you're not going to take out more loans, it may be best for you to have them in repayment and start paying when payment is due under an income-driven repayment plan. And if you're working full-time, then you can continue accumulating credit towards the 120. So
right.
Again,
so
you want to do that.
Yeah, so that's what I want to do. So you said just contact you so I can see how to. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, we want to make sure we have a conversation with you. Would several be considered a non-direct? So as you're going to see the slides that we provided in there, what you want to make sure to determine whether you have direct or non-direct, it's not whether it says staff or subsidized or unsubsidized. It's really whether it has the word direct in there. And we'll do a follow-up email, and in the follow-up email, there's going to be a short video. It's like a 2-minute video walking you through the steps in order to figure out whether you have direct loans or non-direct loans. So don't worry about it. We'll follow up in the email, and we'll give you a quick link to a short video that walks you through the process of determining whether you have non-direct loans. Really, the non-direct loans that we're looking at are the FFEL Perkins loans.
I just want to add one thing to anybody that may be considering this, is that the one thing that you do need is you need to have met the employment requirements for any months that are going to qualify. So if you were in school and had loans, but you weren't working full-time for a qualifying employer, but you are now, that's not going to work. You would have had to have been working full-time for the qualifying employer while you had the loans, and the loans can't be in an in-school deferment. Just to clarify that point, you can't apply current employment credit to past loans.
Thank you for that.
Go ahead, Tay.
Sorry, just to clarify on that point, so if you went to school and then you got a job working in a nonprofit, and you tried to apply for this program, that would only count, that wouldn't count for the previous loans that you had to get that job?
That's correct. So if you did not have that job, if you did not have any kind of qualifying employment when you first took out the loans, you're only going to get credit from the time that you start your employment. You have to have the employment credit in order to get qualifying payment credit towards PSLF. That's an important part of the requirements. Are you following me on that?
Not quite, but in the interest of time, I'll follow up with you guys.
Yeah,
Okay.
so reach out. There's a lot. So if you're someone who went to undergrad and grad and you're trying to figure out how to benefit, if at all, from this waiver, it really requires us to have a conversation and take a look at your loans, the history, and we'll have a discussion about your employment history as well for us to be able to give you proper guidance. So again, just reach out. Again, thank you so much to everyone. We really appreciate it. A big thank you to my colleague Nancy for doing the presentation today. And expect an email within a day or two with, again, the recording, the PowerPoint again, and any additional information that we said we would share. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.